Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts line setter Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 40 event, which takes place in Cincinnati, Ohio. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the entire fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight based on our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all fights with sufficient data. This week, Reed will be able to contribute on 6 of the 13 total bouts. Now, briefly looking back at our last event, our premium bets for UFC 172 had a rough night, going 0-2 to lose 7 units. Our play on underdog Yancy Medeiros, as well as our parlay on Phil Davis paired with the under in the main event, both failed to cash. We'll be looking to turn that around this week. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 40 features a 13-fight card in total and will be aired on Saturday on Fox Sports 1. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off, we have a welterweight contest between Anthony Lapsley, who is 25-6 with 2 no contests, taking on Albert Tumanov, who is 12-2 overall. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how'd the public shifting so far?
Tumanov minus 230 to come back on Lapsley. Plus 170 was my original opener. And right now, the line is under 2-1. Looking over 5 dimes, Tumanov is minus 195. Lapsley is plus 160. So, a little bit of early support coming in on Lapsley. And you know what? Based off their last performances, you really can't be too surprised about that because Tumanov got put on his back on several occasions in his UFC debut, and that's ultimately how he lost the fight. Lapsley is definitely a good, solid wrestler. He brings a lot to the table. I mean, he's really well-rounded beyond that. But the striking is a little bit of a concern. I don't think he's at the point where his striking has kind of caught up to his grappling. I mean, he's more a submission-based fighter, more of a wrestling kind of grinder type of fighter. But Tumanov, on the other hand, he's extremely well-rounded. He's a young Russian prospect. He fought well early against Alcantara, but his cardio is kind of what cost him the fight. I mean, the guy even has solid takedown defense early on when he's not overly aggressive. I think that's what caused him to get taken down in that fight quite a bit as well. But overall, a solid technique on the feet. He's got a ton of power. Just a devastating striker, Tumanov is. And if he gets top position, he lays nasty ground and pound down. His striking overall is very impressive. He has decent movement, loves to throw, like I said, powerful, especially his lead left hook. But he does have power in both hands. And again, on the ground, his takedown defense is a little bit spotty, especially after the fight goes on a little bit more so. But he's just so nasty. It's kind of tough to bet against this guy. I mean, Tumanov, you can see where his potential is. He's only, I believe, 22 years old, so I see a lot of room for improvement. And one of those areas definitely has to be the cardio. But again, Lapsley's an interesting test for him because I think Lapsley really is going to test him again in the area that he does have some deficiencies in, and that's, again, wrestling, and this is cardio, because Lapsley does have pretty solid cardio, and he's a very tough, savvy veteran. So I do think Lapsley's going to be game. He's going to come to fight. He's going to come to win. He's never officially been knocked out. So I think that he's going to be, again, a tough guy to stop. But I think Tumanov, again, is the side because he's just so talented, and I really like what I see from the viciousness in his overall game. So I'm expecting Tumanov to come away with the W here.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, looking at Tumanov, he was a product of UFC jitters in that first fight. And he had Alcantara on the ropes in the first round. He had him in terrible shape and just couldn't quite put him away, and then just spent himself a little too much in that first round and then paid the price in rounds 2 and 3 when Alcantara kind of turned it on a little bit. So this time around, I think the jitters are out of the way. He knows a little bit. He's a little smarter, a little more aware of what he needs to do and what he needs to not do. And I think, Lapsley should be a decent test for him, especially to see where he's at now and what he's learned. Now, looking at Lapsley, he's more of a ground-based fighter. He has pretty good wrestling, and where he really shines is in submissions, in transitions on the ground, sweeps, a little bit of everything. So if Tumanov can keep this fight standing, he's in great shape. If he goes to the ground, he could be in some trouble. Lapsley has some really solid submission ability. He could tap him. He could at least grind him out if he needs to. So that is a concern. But looking at Tumanov, the guy is just ferocious on the feet. He has disgusting power. He's got a little bit of a height advantage, a little bit of a reach advantage, and a huge youth advantage. He is, I believe, 12 years younger than Lapsley. So that factors in. I mean, that means that even though Lapsley hasn't been knocked out, that the probability of him getting knocked out, if Tumanov's huge, powerful fists hit him, it goes through the roof. So I'm going to go with Tumanov. But I am a little concerned just because we need to see what his cardio looks like if he can pace himself. Although, it's a little tough because the guy tries to get fights over in the first round so often. So it's a two-sided sword here. But, I'm going with Tumanov, and I'm relatively confident with this one. Now moving on, we have a lightweight contest featuring Justin Salas, who is 11-5 overall, taking on Ben Wall, who is 7-1-1. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Salas minus 210, Wall plus 160, and again, looking over at the line, Salas is minus 245, comeback on Wall plus 185. Not a huge surprise because Wall never really has gotten too much respect. I know he's a solid guy coming off the Ultimate Fighter as far as the Aussies go, but I mean, he still has a lot of room to improve his overall game. I mean, he basically is a grappling-based fighter. He looks to push forward on the feet just so he can basically clinch up against the fence, try to look for some takedowns. And he is a pretty strong guy, so I give him credit. I mean, he has that going for him. He is coming back down to lightweight, which is a lot better for him, a better fit. I mean, he fought his last fight at 170, and he was basically a sacrificial lamb in that spot. But against Salas, he's definitely going to be in a far more competitive fight. But unfortunately, again, for him, Salas is probably a little bit better in most areas. I know, like I said, Wall's going to probably try to utilize his ground game, but Salas overall has solid wrestling. I know in his last fight against Tavares, he kind of got manhandled on the ground. That's how he lost that fight. But Tavares, I think, is a different beast than he's going to see here against Wall. So Salas does have a significant edge on the feet as far as pure striking goes. The power is going to be interesting because Salas's chin is actually a little bit spotty. I think that it's a little bit questionable. So even though Wall is not really a devastating striker, he still has a little bit of power in his hands. So that's going to be interesting. But I think overall Salas can outpoint Wall on the feet. He's the better, more versed striker. I think his takedown defense is going to be okay here. He's going to be able to possibly get top position on Wall as well. So I really see Salas being the more complete fighter, being the better fighter, and probably outpointing Wall. So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with Salas. More than likely a unanimous decision. But this fight, we could see an end late as well.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Looking at these guys, Salas is just a little bit better in pretty much all the areas. He has a higher pace in terms of being on the feet, and he's definitely a little bit better on the ground, even though Wall probably wants to go to the ground more often than not, even in this fight. I just think that Salas is a little bit better wrestler. I mean, the guy won a decision against Joe Ellenberger back in the day to earn his UFC appearance, so you got to give him some props there. But overall, neither of these guys are probably ever going to be top of the food chain type lightweights. This is probably a loser leaves town match. I just think Salas is a little bit better all around. Salas has better wrestling, and he definitely should be able to get Wall down if he wants it to and control him. Probably just ride out a decision from top position. Now, one thing to be concerned about, neither guy has a great chin. Although Wall, he was hyping up his chin, and then he faced Alex Garcia, as Nick mentioned, sacrificial lamb. He completely got fed to the wolves. Garcia destroyed him in that fight. And Wall is dropping down to his more natural 155 pounds here, where he is going to have about a 2-inch height advantage. Nothing crazy, but I don't think it's going to come into play too much. It might even make him easier to get taken down because Salas will have the lower base. So he can get down there below his hips and get him on his back. And even though Wall is a decent ground fighter, He's a decent ground fighter for an Australian, and unfortunately, they really haven't caught up to the Americans yet in terms of wrestling and submission ability and transitions. So I see Justin Salas grinding this one out and potentially getting a late stoppage. So my pick is Justin Salas. Now moving on to the featherweight division, we have a very interesting battle here between Manny Gamburyan and Nick Lentz. Now Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Lentz minus 315, the comeback on Gamburyan, plus 235. Since that time, a little bit more action coming in, especially with parlays on Lentz. Right now he's minus 370, plus 280. And I think it's pretty much the right move. I mean, Gamburyan, he definitely deserves a ton of respect because he's such a well-rounded fighter. I mean, the guy can do it all. He's got underrated stand-up. He's got some power on the feet. He's a good wrestler, has submission game to go along with it. As he gets a little bit older, he is getting a little bit more chinny. So I don't trust his chin as much, but overall he's definitely a solid fighter that brings it every time. And I think he can be competitive with most at the 145 weight division, no doubt about it. But Lentz, in my opinion, is just a little bit better everywhere in this spot. I think he's going to be the better wrestler. I think he's going to be able to control the fight, get some takedowns against Gamburyan as well. I think on the feet, Lentz throws more of a variety. It could be a little bit more effective as well. And again, he's got a great submission game to go along with it. So you have two very well-rounded fighters matching up, which should be a barn burner, really, if you think about it. I mean, this should be a great fight. But unfortunately for Gamburyan, I do think the Lentz is just another one of those situations where he's just a little bit better everywhere. I think Lentz is kind of going to repeat the pattern of Dennis Seaver in his last fight against Gamburyan and get those takedowns control a little bit more and get the decision. So there's a possibility Lentz also gets a stoppage here, but I do lean Lentz by decision.
Yeah, and for me, I really like Nick Lentz as well. I have to completely agree. The main thing here for me is Gamburyan has taken a decent amount of punishment. Actually, both guys, honestly, have taken a lot of punishment throughout their careers. But I just see Lentz as the more well-rounded fighter, and he's just a little bit bigger and stronger than Gamburyan. What Gamburyan has going for him is he does have the good judo. He's a pretty solid boxer. I think Gamburyan should probably be able to hold his own here in the stand-up if he can keep it standing and if he's aggressive enough. But Lentz is such a grinder. He's so big and so strong and so physical that he's going to present a lot of problems for Gamburyan. He can slow the fight down if he wants to. He can drag it to the ground. He can put it in the clinch and stall it a little bit. And I think if he gets on top, he is a bit of a menace with ground and pound and with submission attempts. So I think Gamburyan is going to be he's going to have his hands full, basically, and it's going to be very difficult for him to keep this fight where he wants it. Now, if Gamburyan can do that, I mean, there's potential that he can walk away with a decision here. I don't see him getting a finish. I don't see either guy really getting a finish unless Lentz lands some really brutal ground and pound for a significant period of time. But I do think that Nick Lentz is just able to use his wrestling here to grind out a victory. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us?
Well, it's true. Manville Gamburyan is a little one-dimensional. He's definitely gotten through with his wrestling. He's stifled some opponents, but I think in this matchup, he's not going to be able to do that. Lentz is also a guy who likes to use his wrestling. He's aggressive with takedowns. So it's a situation where the best bet for Gamburyan to win is kind of canceled out in this case. And so if he's left to fend for himself on his feet, he's definitely going to be at a big disadvantage. Lentz is definitely the more accurate striker. He's much higher paced. He controls opponents. So I think Gamburyan is going to get outclassed on his feet, and I just don't see the option for using his wrestling to control rounds is going to be there. So Lentz is probably a safer play. I just don't, Gamburyan, for him to win this, he's going to have to get this to the mat, leave it there, control it, and he's going to have to do it at least 2 out of 3 rounds. And I just don't see that happening. So I think Lentz is a safer bet here.
Now dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have former title challenger Eddie Weinland, who is 21-9-1 overall, taking on Johnny Eduardo, who is 26-9. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Weinland minus 425 to come back on Eduardo, a plus 305. And looking over at the line right now, Weinland is exactly minus 425. So it did move a little bit early on, but it's kind of tightened the margins up a little bit. So it's staying steady, about a 4-1 favorite. I'm sure we will see possibly some movement again, as more parlays come in. So we could see that line escalate a little bit on Weinland. He's definitely a fan favorite. The way he fights, man, I mean, Weinland has nasty power on the feet. He's got good hands. Well, a good overall striking period. I mean, he keeps on improving that aspect of it. And he's got, again, devastating knockout power to go along with it. He's got a solid chin. He's tough as nails overall. He's been knocked out a couple times in his career, but, I mean, you gotta look closer a little bit at that. And it's not as bad as it seems. So I think Weinland is an extremely talented fighter. He's got good wrestling. He's got a good submission game overall. His sub-defense, depending on the situation, is a little bit spotty, but, I mean, overall, he was a title contender, for a reason. I mean, the guy definitely deserves his top tier ranking in the UFC, bantamweight division. Now, Eduardo, it's kind of strange. I mean, the guy's been out since May of 2012, so it's going to be about 2 years, since he's been last competing in the UFC. So, that is definitely a negative against him. I do think he's a very talented, underrated fighter overall. He is getting up there a little bit in age. I mean, he's 35 years old, so that's not going to help his cause either. But as far as Eduardo goes, he's more of a striking-based fighter. I mean, he's definitely very talented on the feet. He can mix things up. I think technically he's better than Weinland on the feet. He has more variety and a diverse striking attack that he can definitely use. He's got a little bit of knockout power as well, but I just still think on the feet, even though he has that, again, the overall variety of attack, I think Weinland could still be a little bit more effective. So Eduardo, he's not going to be able to take Weinland to the floor. He's going to probably get landed on the feet a little bit, more so, than he lands on, Weinland. So it's going to be a fight that is kind of an uphill battle for him. And again, with that layoff, with everything that's coming into play here, I think it is a good spot for Weinland to, get his role going again and get back towards title contention one more time. But Eduardo, of course, if he comes in and gets the W here, I mean, he's automatically going to get boosted up the ladder pretty fast. So it's a big fight for both guys, but I do think that Weinland, even though he's got a ton of experience, he's still a little bit younger, a little bit fresher. I think he's just a better fighter in this spot as well. So I'm going to have to go with Weinland. I do think, the line is kind of maybe a little bit higher than it should be, but at the same time, I can see a reason for that, and I expect him to get the W here.
And I completely agree. This is, to me, just looks like a stay busy fight for Eddie Weinland, where he wanted to fight often and they couldn't find somebody for him. So they're like, hey, why not Johnny Eduardo? And he said, sure. And looking at it, Eduardo, he's 35 years old, coming off of a 2-year layoff. That just screams, red flag, alert and alarms, everything going off for me. Going in against Eddie Weinland, a guy that's proven, tested, has been in there against some of the best in the world and has beaten some of the best in the world. It's super scary. Weinland has this really impressive, counter striking that it's different, where he pushes forward, puts pressure on his opponents, forces them to engage, and then counters. So he has this really unique style, and it works tremendously. And I really don't know how Eduardo is going to be able to respond to that. Weinland has a really good chin, and, pound for pound, he might be one of the most powerful guys in the UFC. I mean, the guy has just vicious knockout power as a bantamweight, and that's just not something you see that often. Now, Eduardo, he's not a bad fighter. He's pretty well-rounded, and he's got a decent striking acumen. I mean, the guy's pretty technical on the feet. I just don't know what he's going to be able to offer here that Weinland hasn't seen. I mean, Weinland's been in there, title shots. He's been a former WEC champion. He's faced Faber. He's faced Benavidez. He's faced, the who's who of guys in the bantamweight and flyweight divisions. And I don't see how Eduardo can win this fight, honestly, unless he clips Weinland. But even then, I think Weinland has the better chin of the two. And Eduardo, being 35 years old, coming in super rusty, I just think Eddie Weinland probably rolls here. So my pick is clearly Eddie Weinland. So moving on, we have a welterweight contest with undefeated fighter Jan Cabral, who is 11-0 overall, taking on Zach Cummings, who is 16-3 overall. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Cabral minus 305, Cummings plus 225 was my opening line. Cabral's minus 370 right now, so a little bit more action coming in on Cabral. And you know what? Cummings is a very solid, underrated fighter most times, but I do believe that this is a bad matchup for him. I think, as far as skill set, Cummings is probably the overall more well-rounded fighter. I mean, I think his striking is a little bit better, even though he's not a fierce striker. Don't get me wrong. I still think he's a little bit ahead of Cabral's striking game, because Cabral is more of a ground whiz. I mean, he's a BJJ black belt, obviously a very talented one. The guy is sick on the ground. I mean, he's got 10 of his 11 wins are by submission alone. And it's impressive what he does. I mean, he gets the fight to the floor, and then his ability to control, to move, to transition to good spots to get that submission is phenomenal. I mean, Cabral has a huge edge over most people on the ground, and his stand-up is getting a little bit better. I mean, he does throw hard. He's not really known for his striking again, but he does have some nice power in his right hand. That's actually what he dropped Mitchell with in his last fight. He does also throw some hard, heavy kicks as well. But again, he's a grappling whiz. That's what he's really good at. And he's just so fun to watch on the ground. It's also important to note that he was a tough Brazil veteran, and he was successful on the show, but he was forced out due to injury. So who knows? I mean, you could really be talking about Cabral possibly being the Ultimate Fighter Brazil winner up at this point. But that being said, his matchup with Cummings, I mean, it is a tricky matchup because they're so similar in skill sets. I mean, Cummings, I think his best attribute is also on the ground. I think he's very talented. He could win the fight by submission as well. He's got decent wrestling overall, decent wrestling base. But he is going to get outclassed here. On the feet, Cabral can even hang with him there. But I think Cabral is ultimately going to get top position, look for that submission game. If he doesn't submit Cummings, because Cummings is very savvy on the ground as well, I think he's going to do enough to control the fight and unquestionably take a unanimous decision here. So I think Cabral is the side, and I expect him to get the W.
Yeah, and I completely agree on this one. While Cummings had a really impressive UFC debut scoring that quick submission, his second appearance, which you might not remember because the fight never took place, is extremely distressing. He came in 8 pounds overweight for his last fight, and they ended up just canceling it because his opponent didn't accept the catch weight. I'm surprised the UFC actually kept him around, to be honest, after that. But instead they're feeding him to a guy that I think that they're really high on in Cabral, who is just a wizard on the canvas. And I wouldn't expect Cummings to be around if he loses this fight. But looking at it overall, on the ground, Cabral clearly has the advantage, even though Cummings is a pretty solid and competent fighter on the canvas. Cummings is he's got the wrestling, he's got some submissions, but he just doesn't quite stack up compared to Cabral's jiu-jitsu and his transitions and his submissions and everything that he can put together here. On the feet, I think Cummings is scrappier. He can push forward, he can throw, and he has a decent chin, but I think Cabral is a little bit more powerful. And while Cabral does rely a little bit more on single strikes and he's a little more predictable, I think that he can mix it up enough to earn Cummings' respect and then open up opportunities to get this fight to the canvas. And that's where Cabral is going to shine. Cabral is a master from top position. He drops good ground and pound. He latches onto submissions. He's aggressive. He takes risks. And that just really impresses me. I always like those type of fighters. And I think, Cabral, in the worst possible scenario, he should be able to walk away with a decision here, especially if he can just drag this fight to the ground for 1 or 2 rounds. But, best case, he could potentially, finish this fight. So I like, Jan Cabral definitely. So dropping down, we have a flyweight contest featuring Kyoji Horiguchi, who is 12-1 overall, taking on Daryl Montague, who is 13-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Horiguchi -170, Montague +130, and the line is basically staying a little bit steady. It's -175 right now for Horiguchi. Montague is at +145 right now. So, tough matchup because, they're both flyweights that are skilled, very skilled. I know Montague, he's coming off that nasty KO loss in his debut to Dotson, but that's Dotson. You got to give the guy a little bit of credit. And Montague, for those that don't know, he's been on the radar for a long time as a top prospect. So the guy is very talented, very skilled. And what he does best is definitely the striking aspect of his game. He's well-rounded as well. He's got some subs. He's got some underrated wrestling to go along with it. And that part of his game keeps on improving. But again, I think he's a super talented striker, very technical. underrated, and the poor guy's not going to get a ton of respect because, again, that loss to Dotson was so nasty. But you got to give him a lot of credit in that fight too, because most people would have been out with a few shots. I mean, literally. I mean, the commentator even said he was out on his feet. He literally was out on his feet, and he kept on fighting. I mean, it took, more punishment before Dotson finally got him out of there. So you got to respect the heart of Montague. And again, his ability to kind of withstand a little bit of punishment. I don't know if necessarily that's a good thing, but he's definitely a skilled fighter. Now, Horiguchi, on the other hand, I mean, he was fighting in his debut at 135, had some trouble against Dustin Pegg early on, but man, the guy looked nasty after that. I mean, he finally found his groove, found his rhythm. The guy's super fast. He's explosive. I'm glad to see him dropping back down to like 125 for this fight, because I think he's definitely a more natural, fitting flyweight. And he could definitely shake things up in a flyweight division, because the sky's the limit for this guy. I mean, he's only 23 years old, I believe. He's got a karate background. He's a Shudo 132-pound champion in Japan, so that's impressive enough as it is for being so young. So I think we're going to see constant improvement from him. He's coming from a very solid camp over there as well. And what you see in Horiguchi is, again, he's coming from that karate background. His striking is phenomenal to watch. I mean, the guy has good movement. He's fast, explosive, power in both hands. He has some devastating kicks he throws at you. And from a grappling standpoint, I mean, he's got decent trip takedowns, showed some good sub defense. Peg had him in some spots, and he was managed to survive and get out of trouble. And he's very hard to hold down if you do put him on the floor. So Horiguchi is going to, again, excel and get better as he, I guess, continues to evolve as an MMA fighter. But his striking is nasty. Before I got into this fight, I was honestly leaning a little bit more towards Montague, but after I did all the research on Horiguchi, he was nothing but impressive. And I think how he matches up with Montague is very interesting, because Montague had trouble with John Dotson's speed. And Horiguchi, I know this sounds crazy, but arguably he might be a little bit quicker than Dotson. I mean, not as explosive with that power, but Horiguchi does have a ton of power as well. So it's almost a similar type of matchup that Montague had against Dotson. So this is not going to, I think, be as good as I thought it was early on for Montague. I think Horiguchi's kind of a bad matchup for him. And with this power, I expect this fight to probably hit the cards. I'm going to give Montague the benefit of the doubt here, but if he's not careful, we could see a repeat of the last fight as well, because Horiguchi is that kind of fighter that he can definitely pose a knockout threat here as well. But I'm going to lean with Horiguchi. I hope Montague shows up, because he deserves some respect, and I hope he makes it competitive, but I think Horiguchi does get the win.
Yeah, I feel terrible for Montague. I mean, he's a guy that people were hyping up as the best unsigned flyweight that UFC didn't have yet, and they throw him in there against Dodson in his UFC debut. He gets knocked out, and now he's facing Horiguchi, a guy that I think has all the potential in the world, a guy that could be a top 10 flyweight, and he just hasn't fought at flyweight yet in the UFC. But man, just a tough road here for Montague. Now, you look at the times that he's lost throughout his career, and it's been similar type of fighters. Ian McCall was able to take him down, wear him out on the canvas, and then submit him. John Dotson was just a little bit quicker and more powerful and explosive, and he blasted him. So I think Horiguchi is a little bit of a mix of both guys. He's got the stand-up where he's, very dangerous. He's very fast. He's pretty technical and powerful on the feet. And on the canvas, he is tenacious. He has really good submission defense. He gets out of bad spots, and Montague does have an underrated ground game, but I don't think it's going to be enough to threaten Horiguchi. And then Horiguchi from top position is just lethal. He drops some huge ground and pound. He's ferocious. I mean, he finished a bantamweight with ease in that second round against Pegg. And I think that he could potentially do the same thing here against Montague. So on the feet, I think Montague could be in trouble, and I think on the ground he's especially going to be in trouble. Now, I'm not going to completely discount Montague. I mean, he's a top guy for a reason. He has really good power on the feet. If he does connect, who knows what could happen. And on the canvas, he is a little tricky. I mean, he throws up a lot of submissions. He can catch people in arm bars and triangle chokes. He's got pretty long legs. So he's not completely a fish out of the water here if the fight goes to the canvas, if he gets put in his own guard. But I just think Horiguchi has the advantage in almost all the facets of this fight. And this is going to be his time to shine. So my pick is Kyoji Horiguchi. All right, now the final bout on the Fox Sports 2 preliminary card is a middleweight contest between Ed Short Fuse Herman, who is 21-9 with 1 no contest overall, taking on Rafael Natal, who is 17-5-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Natal minus 150, Herman plus 110. That was my opening number. And it's minus 145 for Natal right now, plus 115. So it kind of bounced back and forth for a little bit early on. In fact, I believe Herman was like a very, very slight favorite, but stayed around pick'em. Now Natal got some love back and support, and he is the slight favorite in this case. And I think that's about right. I mean, Natal deserves to be the slight favorite. I think he's better in several areas of this fight. I mean, he's got outstanding underrated wrestling. I mean, the guy obviously has a sick jiu-jitsu game, and his striking's really good. I mean, he uses some kind of unorthodox striking a little bit, but it's very effective. And he's the better striker, no doubt about it, than Herman. But the problem for me with Natal is he does tend to fade, as we all know. I mean, his cardio lets him down more times than not. And when he does, I mean, his chin bothers me substantially. I mean, it's just to the point he's been knocked out 4 times, I believe, in his career. And he's coming off a devastating knockout loss to the hands of Tim Kennedy as well. So there's some question marks around here. Now, even if he's looking good early on, I just don't really trust him enough to maintain that. And Herman, you know what you're getting out of Herman. I mean, he's a very solid fighter. Obviously, he's been around the UFC for a long time. The guy is more than capable of hanging with solid middleweights. I mean, the guy has good wrestling in his own right. He has some power on the feet. Not the most technical fighter at times, but he does have some power on the feet as well. He could be effective in that area. And he's also, I hate to say it, but his strike defense, if he has a flaw, it's definitely his strike defense that lets him down in most cases, because he gets tagged quite a bit. But that being said, I think he's going to probably weather an early storm and then find his spot and possibly catch Natal again. So I'm kind of leaning a little bit. I've been going back and forth on this fight, honestly, because they both match up so well. Natal, again, is slightly better. He's a better striker. He's a better wrestler. He's, can be a little bit more effective. I just don't trust that chin. I think we could possibly see a scenario, like we did in the Craig fight, where Natal was winning, dominating the fight, and then getting caught late because his cardio and his strike defense kind of let him down. So if Herman can manage to survive early, I think he's got a legit shot. So I guess I'm going to slightly lean towards Herman in this fight, because I do think that he's a little bit more solid. You know what you're getting from him. He's a little bit more consistent, but the skill is definitely Natal's favor.
Yeah, and looking at this fight, I have to completely agree with you that Natal should win it on paper. He is a little bit better in most areas, but the two of the most important areas for fighters are chin and endurance. Because as good as somebody can be in striking on the ground with their wrestling, if they can't last 15 minutes, if they can't handle getting hit in the face really hard, then it all goes out the window. So I think Rafael Natal has got that same problem where he wins fights until he loses them. And Ed Herman is right up that alley where he's the type of fighter that can take advantage of that. Now, I do think that Natal has the potential to win this fight. He could even get a submission possibly, because Herman has been susceptible to submissions in the past. You saw in the Damian Maia fight. Obviously, Maia's amazing on the ground. But also in the Jacare fight, again, Jacare's amazing on the ground. But Natal's a solid ground fighter as well. And if he gets him in some bad spots, Herman could get in some trouble. But fighting in America, I think that will help Herman a little bit. And I think just the fact that Natal's coming off of a brutal knockout to Tim Kennedy, again, where he was fighting in hostile territory, I think that Herman's in a decent spot here. He has a strong chin. He's got decent defensive wrestling, not great, and he hits pretty hard. So if Herman can outlast Natal's early burst, then I think he's in a decent position here to take over late and either earn a late decision or a late stoppage. So my pick's Ed Herman as well. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one? They're probably all over the place.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of wild cards in this one, and you're right. On technical merit alone, Natal is the more skilled fighter, both on his feet and on the ground. But there's a lot of wild cards here, because one gaping hole in Natal's defense is his chin. He's been dropped 4 times. That is more than any fighter on the card. But on the flip side, Ed Herman's strike avoidance is not only the worst on the card, it's the worst in history for a fighter with over an hour of cage time. So this guy eats a lot of punches, and Natal does know how to knock people down. So for a lot of reasons, if this stays standing, one way or the other, someone's going to get hurt. Now on the ground, it kind of cancels each other out. Both guys are skilled grapplers, but Ed Herman has been submitted several times in the UFC, even more in his career, and Natal has never been submitted. So I got to give the edge on the ground to Natal. He's also shockingly going to be the younger fighter. Natal is. And he does have a reach advantage. So for a lot of reasons, I'm leaning Natal. I'm glad to see that the line is very close, which gives me the luxury of sort of just picking who I lean towards. And I see ingredients for a possible finish. I know these guys do go to decision a lot, but the way they match up with lots of dangerous skills and some holes in their defense makes me think that maybe there's going to be an early finish. But I'm leaning Natal. I do know he's a risk to get hit and dropped, just like he did against Kennedy. But I think he's going to be a lot better equipped to face Herman, at least early on.
Now, kicking off the main card on Fox Sports 1 is a flyweight contest between Chris Kamikaze Cariaso, who was 16-5 overall, taking on Luis Smolka, who is 7-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Smolka opens -130. The comeback on Cariaso was -110. A little bit of movement again back and forth. Cariaso was actually the slight favorite, but it stayed pick'em. And right now over at 5-9, Smolka is back to 130. So two-way support. I think a lot of people were split on this fight, and it's such a competitive fight. I mean, again, at flyweights, you gotta love it because the flyweights have been outstanding to watch fight. And I think this is going to be another barn burner. It's going to be a great fight. I'm looking at things right away. I mean, what stands out the most is the reach advantage Smolka's going to have. I mean, he's 5'9" as far as height goes. He's going to have a 6-inch height advantage over Cariaso. And as far as reach goes as well, he's going to have, I believe, a 4-inch pure reach advantage, over Cariaso as well. And I mean, how could you deny how impressive Smolka was in his UFC debut against, Alp? I mean, Alp, a very strong fighter, very solid fighter, a very well-rounded fighter. And Smolka basically was able to neutralize everything that, Oskilic threw at him and was able to outpoint him, outstrike him, landed more, his ground game and his ability to get back up on the feet, his submission defense, everything about him, I mean, was just really impressive. In fact, way better than I saw on footage. So you could tell, again, he's another young guy, at age 22 that continues to improve his overall game at a rapid pace. So that's scary for, the flyweight division. You have an up-and-coming, solid, legit prospect in Smolka that will only get better with time. Now, he's definitely facing a stiff test in Cariaso. I mean, Cariaso is so well-rounded as well. He's a southpaw on the feet. We all know what he's made of. I mean, the guy can do it all, basically. I mean, he's got very underrated striking. He's very effective with the striking. He's got a little bit of power to go with it. Throws beautiful kicks with his striking attack. Has a submission game to go along with it. Has some decent underrated wrestling. And the judges just love him because he's a little spark plug. I mean, the guy's great to watch. And he's been in there with some solid competition and performed very well. So Cariaso's the proven vet. And this isn't going to be really that much of a big step up at all for Cariaso, which it probably will be for Smolka. But I think it's a step that Smolka can basically pass. I think that Smolka is going to be able to keep this fight standing enough, then he's going to be the more effective striker on the feet. I think he's going to be able to land more on Cariaso. I mean, that reach advantage is going to come into play. There's no doubt about it to me. And I think the Smolka is going to be just the more effective fighter here, and I think the judges are going to be able to see that. So barring, Cariaso kind of taking him down, laying on him, for 3 rounds, I don't think that's going to happen. I think Smolka could win this fight. I mean, he's, again, very submission savvy as well, Smolka. He's with those long limbs. I mean, you have to be on, definitely be on your toes with him. I mean, as far as, the ability to finish fights. So you got to be cautious when grappling with Smolka. And on the feet, he's just getting better and better, utilizing that reach and effective in his striking. So I think it's actually Smolka's fight to win or lose here, depending on how he fights. And you know what, from a fight IQ perspective, I mean, you have to say, the guys, for being so young, Smolka's also mature, I guess, beyond his years a little bit too, which is good to see. So I think there's a big upside to Smolka. And if he does pass this test in Cariaso, I mean, the guy's going to be an instant, top tier, I guess. I don't know if I'm going to say top contender, but a top tier, flyweight here. So I'm going to pick Smolka to beat Cariaso, which is kind of surprising because I got a ton of respect for Cariaso.
Yeah, and this is one where I'm going to agree. I just think the physical tools are going to come into play here. While Cariaso has looked pretty good in his last few fights, scoring that that knockout win over Santos and then withstanding Danny Martinez, I think that Smolka, he's going to be so much bigger than Cariaso and so much younger that that's going to be a factor. Well, looking at it, I do think Cariaso should be a better striker. He definitely utilizes his overall game a lot better. He sneaks in a lot of kicks. He's pretty active with his striking. He's definitely more technical on the feet. But I think that the size is going to be such a disadvantage for him. And while Smolka, at first in his UFC debut, watching his tape, I didn't think that his stand-up was, anything special. He actually showed serious improvements from all the work he's done with Max Holloway and Russell Doan and all those guys at that 808 fight team in Hawaii. That he really took it to that next level. And being as young as he is, there's so much potential for growth that it's difficult to get a read on just how good his striking will be when we see him in the cage this time around, because he's still growing and developing so much. And Cariaso, you kind of know what you're getting here. The guy is solid. He mixes it up well. He switches stances. He's southpaws. And he throws his kicks very often. So I think Smolka's ready for that. And on the ground, while Cariaso is pretty good with takedown defense and everything, if Smolka can get him down, he's going to be in really good shape, because I think that's where he's at his absolute best, is when he's in top position, dropping ground and pound, softening up opponents, potentially getting a submission. The guy's a really good talent. The only way I really see Cariaso pulling this one out is if he can utilize really good footwork, if he can get a read on Smolka very, very early, and then potentially if he just outpoints him over the course of 3 rounds. But, barring that happening, I think Smolka surprises some people and gets another solid performance here on national television this time around. So my pick is Luis Smolka. So moving on, we have a heavyweight contest between Soa the Hulk Pelle, who is 20-3 overall, taking on UFC newcomer Ruin Potts, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Pelle minus 190, Potts plus 150. And man, I'll tell you what, both these guys are very questionable as far as the UFC heavyweight division goes, as far as being on the roster, period. And, that being said, the heavyweight division is fairly weak still, I think from top to bottom, but man, Pelle is 2-0, I believe, in the UFC, so you got to give him a little bit of respect. And he has another winnable fight in front of him in Potts. I mean, Potts is a South African fighter. He's a very solid fighter, as far as, I guess, the regional circuit goes. I mean, he's the EFC Africa heavyweight champion. So that says something. I mean, EFC is a decent organization, but I mean, again, it's kind of more of a regional show. The level of competition hasn't been very good as far as Potts goes, and Pelle's definitely been in there with the better fighters. But again, I think that Pelle is just so overrated overall that it's hard for me to put a lot of stock and faith in Pelle. I know he's been training, and he's been working on his overall game. He's got that motivation. He's got that desire to prove a point in the UFC. So again, being 2-0, got to give him a little bit of respect, but his physical size is what's going to help him in most cases. And again, he's going to have that size advantage over Potts here as well. So I think as far as how they match up, I mean, striking, starting off with Potts, I guess, first, he's not very smooth on the feet, but he does have power, especially in his left hook. He does tend to throw a little bit of sloppy kicks. What impressed me from Potts is his ability to use knees from the clinch. I mean, he's definitely capable of landing some hard knees. He throws aggressively, and wild a little bit at times. So he can be dangerous in that aspect too, but grappling is Potts' game. I mean, he loves to get the fight to the floor, look for submissions, even off his back. I mean, he has a sick guillotine choke that's very tight when he gets it around your neck. So Pelle definitely has to watch out for that. But his takedown defense overall is pretty bad. So I think Soa's going to eventually get the takedown early in round 1, and do some nasty ground and pound and put Potts in all sorts of trouble. But that being said, I think Potts also has the capability possibly of hanging in there and maybe reversing things. And if he gets top position, he has some nasty ground and pound of his own. So Pelle definitely has to look out for that. But overall, I think Pelle on the feet is a little bit better. I think Pelle is going to have that size advantage, the wrestling advantage, where he can dictate where this fight goes, and probably put Potts on the floor, on his back, maybe get position like he did against Barry, and possibly finish the fight that way. So I do think it's Pelle's fight to win or lose. If he doesn't make a mistake, and let Potts get in control, he should win this fight, and probably by stoppage. I think, I don't expect this fight to go 3 rounds at all. I think there is going to be a finish, considering how bad Pelle's cardio is. Potts actually has a little bit more gas in the tank, but his cardio, he does tend to slow as the fight goes on as well. So I'm going to lean towards Pelle. Never a confident pick when I'm honestly picking Soa. But that being said, I think it's another winnable fight for him. And if Pelle is 3-0 on this resurgence in the UFC, I'll be a little surprised, but it's very possible in this fight. So I'm picking Silva.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I'll just start this off by just expressing disappointment that this fight is even on the main card, especially when you have something like, the number 4 bantamweight, or at least in rankings on the UFC roster, fighting on the prelims. Eddie Weinland should be on this main card. Or even Nick Lentz Gamburyan, that's another top 10 fighter. Or even Horiguchi Montague, 2 really good flyweights. I just don't get it. I guess it's just because they're big and, people like that. But looking at this is an ugly fight. Pelle, not that good. Most of his wins are not over UFC caliber opponents. Even his most 2 UFC wins, Pat Barry's final fight as a mixed martial artist, and Nikita Krylov, who, as we see, just not a very talented fighter overall. And, he kind of is lucked into 2 wins over 2 not very good heavyweights, and he's getting a 3rd one. So it's just crazy to me. But Ruin Potts, man, 8-1 overall, but none of those wins are that impressive. While he did get a lot of stoppages and he has shown some power, the strength of competition is just horrendous. And looking at it, while Nick did mention that he has a good guillotine, he's got decent submission ability, I don't see how that could ever work. The submissions that he pulls off, the technique he's using against UFC caliber opponents. I really don't see him submitting anyone unless he really hurts them first on the feet, and then they're just defenseless. But looking at this fight, there's one thing that just stands out. It's the ground game, where Potts is so bad with his takedown defense, and Pelle has already attempted 8 takedowns in his UFC career, and he lands them at a pretty high rate. So I really see Pelle getting inside, whether it's the clinch or just shooting in for takedown, even though he's not very fast or explosive, and being able to put Potts on his back, get on top position, and pound him out. Now, I'll give Potts a little bit of credit. I believe he's training with the Black Zillions for this fight, and he's slimmed down a little bit. He's probably going to be about 8 to 10 pounds lighter when he steps into the cage against Pelle than if you looked at him on tape. But again, I don't see how he's able to hang at this fight, just because I just think he's at a huge skill disadvantage. And on the feet, Potts is going to be a little bit quicker, but he doesn't throw combinations. It's more just single heavy strikes. And as long as Pelle, is got his hands up, he should be able to avoid it. So my pick is Soa Pelle here. Now moving down to the welterweight division, we have Neil Magny, who is 9-4 overall, taking on UFC returnee Tim Means, who is 25-1 overall. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened Means -185 to come back on Magny +145. And right now, you look over at the line at 5 dimes, and Means -260 to come back on Magny is +220. So obviously more support coming in on Means. I'm not too shocked, because I know amongst the hardcore fans, Means is just a very popular fighter. They love his fighting style. He's always an exciting fighter to watch. He's got devastating striking skills on the feet. He's nasty. The guy mixes things up so well. He's got that killer instinct about him, and he's a pretty well-rounded fighter in all basis of MMA as well. I know his kryptonite is his takedown defense. At times it's a little bit spotty. He's been put on his back. That's how he's lost his fights in the UFC, obviously. But overall, he's got solid wrestling credentials. He doesn't use it a lot, but he's got some potential with the submission game as well. So these guys match up well. It's just the clear advantage that Means has in this fight will be the striking, but I'm not sure if it's as clear as everybody really thinks here. I'm kind of in disagreement. Like I said, I'm not surprised that the overall action came in on Means, but I think Magny's getting a little bit disrespect in this spot because he's a lot more solid than people think. He's actually going to have a reach advantage over Means, and that's really not usually the case in a Tim Means fight because Means is pretty long himself, but Magny's going to have the pure reach advantage. He's not bad on the feet. He could be very effective. He mixes things up well. Doesn't have as much power as I would like, but he's still capable of being effective on the feet. Now, what's going to come into play for me is if Magny can get the takedowns. I mean, Magny's wrestling is extremely underrated. He does go for takedowns. He can be effective using them as well. He's got decent ground and pound, decent grappling abilities. So that's what the wild card is going to be for me. If Magny can utilize his wrestling and get some takedowns in here, use that reach advantage on the feet to kind of keep his distance, and mix things up well, and his chin holds up, I think he's got a legit shot of possibly pulling off this upset. So I think as far as betting goes, it's a dog or pass situation. As far as a pure pick goes, it's not a very confident pick, but I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Means in this fight.
Yeah, and I'm going to go the other way for this one. I just think that Neil Magny's finally, it took a while, but he's finally starting to use that reach. You mentioned he has a reach advantage in this fight. He's got a reach advantage over every single person in the welterweight division. He's almost got a reach advantage over everyone in the entire UFC. His reach is ridiculous. It's over 80 inches, I believe, as a welterweight. John Jones has the longest reach in the UFC at 84 or 85 inches, and he's a light heavyweight. So, this guy has freakishly long arms. And in his last fight, he finally started to use his reach advantage. He kept his opponent at distance. He picked him apart, and he threw at a high rate. So I was very, very impressed with what Neil Magny was able to accomplish. Now, we'll see if he can keep that up, especially against somebody as aggressive as Tim Means. But looking at Magny first, he's a guy that's finally starting to come into his own a little bit. He's a solid striker, doesn't have a lot of power, but he's starting to learn how to control distance, use footwork properly, use his pace, keep it on the feet if he wants to, and he has pretty solid wrestling to fall back on if he needs it. Now, Means, he's just a downright nasty, dirty type of fighter. He's nicknamed the Dirty Bird for a reason. He's got power, he's got size, he's got the physical tools, and while he is a little one-dimensional overall, because he just goes for the kill with the knockout most of the time, he's very, very good at that one thing. So that is something you got to watch out for. Neil Magny did get knocked out on The Ultimate Fighter, so it's not like it hasn't happened before. But I think Means is going to be a little surprised. I'm not sure how he's going to be able to handle fighting somebody that's actually a little taller than him for once, and somebody with a significant reach advantage over him, because those were the toys that he was able to employ when he was at lightweight, where he was so much bigger than everyone else. So I think that Neil Magny is able to at least avoid that early blitz from Tim Means and wear him out a little bit and get that decision victory. So my pick's Neil Magny. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they confirm what we've been saying. Tim Means definitely has some nasty striking. He has a lot of finishes on his record with his hands. But Magny is going to have a huge reach advantage, and he's got good avoidance. So we haven't seen him get dropped since he's come out of the Tough Show. He's been tagged a few times, and he ate it, and he kept going. So I'm with you, Brian. I'm leaning Magny here based on the line itself, which is pretty steep. I think there's some value on Magny. Certainly to a rounds prop, stealing at least a round, using his wrestling, using his clinch game, using that long reach, and throwing a jab. He looked very improved in his last fight. He out-wrestled him, he outworked him, but his stand-up striking looked much better. So Tim Means coming up a weight class is no longer going to have that huge reach advantage that he had at lightweight. And Tim Means was out-wrestled by Masvidal and Castillo. So I see value on a possible upset here. I don't think, if Magny weathers that early storm and stifles that game, I also probably see this going the distance. So an overplay would be interesting. But yeah, it's tough for Means to come right back into the UFC. He's stepping up in a weight class, and he's facing a much bigger opponent. So I did confirm that Magny has the longest reach in UFC history for a welterweight, which does have an effect on these fights. If he learns how to use that properly, it can really help him defensively. as well as offensively if he uses a stiff jab. So lots of reasons why I think there's some value on Magny here, and maybe some prop plays are the best way to go.
All right, excellent. Now, moving on to the lightweight division, we have Eric Koch making his second appearance at lightweight with 14-3 record overall, taking on Darren Cruickshank, who is 14-4 overall. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Koch minus 270, the comeback on Cruickshank plus 190, and again, not a huge surprise, but looking over at the line, Koch is minus 350. Comeback on Cruickshank is at plus 290. So more support on Koch. He's a very popular fighter. He's a very good fighter overall. I know he had some setbacks there for a minute, at featherweight, but still he's bounced back. He got a good win at lightweight. A lot of people have faith in him again. What bothers me about Koch is obviously he's coming off some of those, bad performances where he got tagged. I mean, against Poirier, he survived enough to make the fight interesting still, but he still got lit up a little bit, and his chin was a little bit more suspect than we're used to seeing. So that bothers me. And with a fighter like Cruickshank, I mean, he definitely has some power on the feet. He uses his karate style striking. He moves well. And he throws a little bit unorthodox again. So he uses all those angles, can definitely be effective and could possibly land on Koch. I do think Koch is the better overall fighter again, though. I think Koch is actually the better striker overall as well. He could be a little bit more effective. So there's more possibilities for Koch to win this fight. I think Koch can win this fight by knockout. I think Koch can win this fight by submission, and I think he can win it by decision. Whereas Cruickshank can probably maybe catch Koch and possibly knock him out. I don't see him really winning a decision against Koch, but I guess it's possible. It's an outside chance. But Koch has more ways to win this fight. He is a better fighter. He has the hype on his side as well. I am not really thrilled with the line movement, though. I mean, like I said, minus 350. I want to, see Koch perform a little bit better than he has been, be a little bit more consistent again at 155, and then go from there. So as far as a bet goes, I think it's probably a pass situation, or there's going to be maybe some bettors out there that look at Cruickshank. But as far as a pure pick goes, you got to go with Koch because he is, I think, the better overall fighter.
Yeah, and this one scares the lights out of me a little bit. Looking at it, Koch, he was a talented guy at featherweight. At one point he was supposed to fight for the title, but then he went on that losing streak where he just looked terrible in his fights against Dustin Poirier and Ricardo Lamas. I mean, granted, those are two of the best featherweights in the division, but, those were fights where he was supposed to be competitive, supposed to prove that he was a contender, and he just got obliterated, finished and dropped repeatedly and hurt in both fights. So I think that this is a scary fight for him. Darren Koch looked like $1 million in his debut at lightweight against Rafael Oliveira, but again, that was a fight where he was expected to win. I think UFC kind of gave him a gimme almost, as Oliveira was on his way out of the promotion. Now, Cruickshank, while he's not a top-tier guy in the lightweight division, he is really solid. He's a very good striker. He's very dangerous. He proved that in his last fight against Mike Rio, where he just pulled off an insane knockout. So, this guy is dangerous from all areas. Now, Koch, I do think, has a little bit more power in his punches, but Cruickshank can mix it up a little bit better. He's got that Taekwondo background. So I think that both these guys have pretty bad chins. Both guys have been dropped. Both guys have been knocked out, both on The Ultimate Fighter for Cruickshank and in their UFC careers. So that does scare me a little bit, that both these guys are a little chinny and anything can kind of happen. But I think that Cruickshank is going to be a little bit more experienced in the lightweight division. I think he's going to be a little more dangerous. And while Koch could pull something off, I think he's a little more dangerous off of his back and everything. But I just think that Cruickshank, the fact that he's so diverse on the feet and the way that he can mix it up, it's going to present a few more opportunities. And pretty much whoever lands that first big shot is probably going to win this fight. And I think it's going to be Cruickshank fighting a little closer to home. So my pick is Darren Cruickshank. Now, Reed, who do the numbers back up for this one?
Well, once again, I'm kind of smelling an upset here. The line got a little steep for my taste, so I looked deeper. And, Cruickshank, his striking is really, really good. He has that unorthodox stance. He switches hands. He throws a lot of kicks. He loves throwing head kicks. And Eric Koch has been knocked down twice. And for a young guy to have been knocked out like that, it's kind of a red flag for me. His head strike avoidance is good, but the damage he's received and the knockdowns is a red flag. So against a pure striker like Cruickshank, that's dangerous. So Koch, his best bet is probably turning this into a grappling match. We've seen him look pretty good on the ground in the past, here and there, so he could be a submission threat. But if he chooses to stand and trade with Cruickshank, he might get into trouble here. I think Cruickshank could find the chin at some point if they stay on their feet. Darren is probably used to facing guys who want to take him down. So his defensive takedown defense is actually quite good. It's nearly 80%, although he doesn't have a huge sample size there, but he has been good so far. So he's going to be the bigger guy, or at least the longer guy, which is more important. So Koch is going to have to work for this. So for such a steep betting line, I cannot support Koch as such a big favorite. I do think there's potential, so I'll throw one number out for you. Cruickshank inside the distance or by TKO is pushing nearly 6-1, plus upper 500s. So that's a pretty juicy prop if you think that Cruickshank might find the chin at some point. Granted, these are lightweights, not tons of knockouts at that weight class, but both guys do like to stand and trade in terms of engagement. They both come forward. But Koch, I think he wants to get this to the ground. He's a threat to finish submission-wise, so maybe an under is a safer bet here. But Cruickshank could pull off an upset, and I think that would be a nice feather in his cap.
Now, the co-main event of the evening is a middleweight contest. We have Costas Philippou, who is 12-4 with 1 no contest overall, taking on Lorenz Larkin, who is 14-2 with 1 no contest overall. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
My opener, Larkin minus 210, the comeback on Philippou, plus 160. And right now, Larkin is at minus 235. Philippou's at plus 195. So not a ton of movements. Philippou, definitely a very talented fighter, very strong. He's got good hands. I mean, powerful on the feet as well. Of course, he's coming off two losses in a row, but the devastating, body kick loss to the hands of Luke Rockhold there as well. So I'm not quite sure where mentally Philippou is. I mean, you suffer a devastating loss like that, makes you think a little bit. And he's fighting another talented striker in Larkin. So what we expect out of this fight, at least what I expect, is pretty much a stand-up war back and forth with these two guys, because that's what they both like to do. They both have solid takedown defense, and they both like to stand and bang. So I think that's what we're going to get to see, because the wrestling, I think, will probably neutralize each other out. So Philippou, again, mentally, I'm not sure where he's at, because he's going to fight arguably a better pure striker in Larkin than he faced against Rockhold. Again, Rockhold very talented, so take that for whatever it's worth. But I'm saying, like, Larkin has a lot more ability on the feet. He throws a variety of kicks. He mixes things up well with his hands. And his attack, again, is a little bit unorthodox. He switches things up. He switches his feet up enough. He's going to be moving all over the place. I mean, it's going to be hard for Philippou to hit Larkin, but I think it's going to be easier for Larkin to land a little bit more consistently on Philippou. My only question mark, I guess, regarding this fight as far as Larkin, kind of bullied up against the fence and sits there a little bit too long and lets people work. So he's going to have to avoid the fence, keep his back off the cage a little bit, and he's going to have to just sit there and work. And if he works, he should win this fight, I think, kind of no problem. I mean, I do respect, again, Philippou's striking ability. You can never underestimate the guy, but I just think Larkin is just a better pure striker, and he's going to basically outpoint Philippou to a decision win here. That's what I think is going to happen. So Larkin also has a slight edge in wrestling and takedown accuracy. I could see, like I said, it's kind of more a neutral type of thing, but I do think if anybody gets some takedowns, it might be Larkin sneaking in a takedown. But more so than not, I do think ultimately this fight plays out on the feet, and Larkin is a better striker, so I got to go with Larkin.
Yeah, and I have to agree on this one. One of the biggest differences between these guys is the diversity that Larkin presents on the feet. While Philippou is a very good boxer, he might even have better boxing than Larkin overall. That's all he has, unfortunately. He really doesn't mix it up on the feet that much. He doesn't go for kicks. He doesn't go to the body. He pretty much just boxes to the head. While he does have very good counters, that's about it. So you look at this fight, and you've got Larkin, who is very athletic. He's very able to get in, get out quickly. He has a really good jab. He has really good technical skills, and he mixes it up. So he can go to the body, he can go to the clinch, he can throw knees, he can throw spinning kicks, and he can do just about everything. And that's the biggest difference. And then the other difference, of course, is the age gap. Philippou's in his mid-30s now, and Larkin's, he's still on his way up. And while Larkin is 1-2 in his UFC career, I think he has a lot more potential. I mean, the guy did beat Robbie Lawler easily when they fought at middleweight in Strikeforce. So, I mean, the guy is loaded with potential. He just needs to tap into a little bit. The one thing that does scare me with Larkin is, while he doesn't have a bad chin, he did get knocked out. It doesn't count on his official record, but he did get knocked out by King Mo when he fought at light heavyweight, and he has this tendency to be very inactive at times. So if Philippou picks up the pace, something that he's not that great at either, but if he does, he could potentially take advantage of that. But overall, though, I just think that the tools that Larkin has here, age, everything, tail of the tape, across the board, it's looking pretty good for Larkin. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us?
Well, I agree with you. I think Larkin's attack is very diverse. He loves throwing kicks. He throws twice as many leg kicks as is normal against a guy in Costa Philippou who is really, really one-dimensional with his strike selection. He's extremely focused on the head. So 93% of his strikes are aimed at the head. He does not mix it up. And that tells me that Larkin should be able to stay on the outside, throw lots of kicks, chop him down, slow him down. And Larkin is the much younger fighter. And this isn't a situation where Larkin's going to get just outclassed because of size and thrown up against the fence and bullied. They're the same size, and Larkin is much younger. So I'm seeing a lot of reasons why I think Larkin is the safer play here. I'm not sure if either one of these guys will necessarily finish it. I think it'll be back and forth, but I just see Larkin landing more often, staying out of danger. It could be a close fight, and it could go the distance, but Larkin should land a lot of kicks, and that usually looks pretty good. And I think he learned his lesson in his last fight. He needs to step on the pedal. He can't sit back and just expect judges to reward accuracy. He has to throw some volume. So we should see him a little busier this time. And Costa Philippou, he's the boxer. He's been around a while. He's a little bit older now. And you wonder how many times he's been hit in the head as a boxer. But he hasn't looked too chinny. His last knockout was actually a body shot that dropped him. So he should be able to withstand. So I think it's a striking duel. It stays on its feet, and Larkin probably outpoints him. But the comments about Philippou, his ground game, that has actually stepped up quite a bit. He's looked pretty decent on the ground when tested. And I know he's been focusing on that. So it would be really interesting if he chose to try to take this to the ground, knowing that it was a striking duel, and try to show off his jits. That's kind of a long shot, but it's an intriguing thing to look for as the fight goes on. But in the meantime, yes, I think Larkin is a justified favorite here.
All right, so this takes us to the main event of the evening. We have Matt Brown, who is 20-11 overall, taking on upstart Eric Silva, who is 16-4 with 1 no contest overall. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
My opener, minus 170 for Silva. The comeback on Brown was plus 130. It's over 2-1 now if you're looking at the line over 5 dimes. Minus 235, comeback plus 195 on Brown. So line has increased a decent amount. I mean, I guess, again, not very surprised. I mean, if you look at the hype and the intrigue and just the ability that Silva has, I mean, amongst diehard fans, I mean, Silva was supposed to be the guy from Brazil that possibly will contend for the title one day at welterweight. I mean, the guy's a beast. He's young. He keeps on improving in all areas, but I mean, he has been inconsistent, so he hasn't kind of lived up to all that hype. So from a betting perspective, I understand, again, why people are kind of expecting him to do well, because there's been all this buzz around him for a long time. On the other hand, with Brown, he hasn't really had that buzz. I mean, he had to kind of grind things out and work for what he's accomplished in the UFC, which has been outstanding, really. I mean, he's been on quite a roll, with solid wins over solid competition as well. So Brown has really elevated his game. He's put the work in. He's improved significantly. I mean, from top to bottom, you could definitely tell. So he's had kind of, I guess, work to get where he's at compared to Silva. Silva has been, again, more in the public spotlight, more of the hype factor coming into play. So that's why I think you're seeing the line more so than anything else move in his favor. But as far as edge goes, I do think that Silva is a more capable fighter, especially at finishing this spot. I mean, on the ground, Matt Brown probably has an underrated submission game offensively, but I mean, let's face it, guy's been subbed, I believe, 9 times in his career. So he has some flaws in the submission defense angle, but he has been training at Drysdale for this fight, for this camp. So his jiu-jitsu should be, his sub defense at least should be better than it's ever been before, putting in the time in Vegas with Drysdale and crew. I think that certainly doesn't hurt his chances of surviving if the fight does hit the floor against Silva. But I do ultimately think that if Silva wins this fight, it's probably still going to be by submission. I mean, Silva is aggressive on the feet. He hits like a truck. He can end things in so many different ways. And on the ground, that's another significant, like I said, advantage. I mean, his submission skill, once he grabs a limb or your neck, it's pretty much done. I mean, he's that good. He sinks it in quick, and he can end your night fast. So as far as a pure pick, I'm going to go with Silva because I think he does have more ways to win this fight again. I think he could win by submission, even though Brown has a great chin. Overall, he has been tagged. He's susceptible to getting hit a little bit. So I wouldn't exactly count that out either. As far as cardio goes, I should mention this as well. Both of these guys do tend to fade a little bit, but Silva more so than Brown. I mean, Brown, I think, again, he's taken everything a lot more serious. His conditioning's even improved on this little run that he's had. So I think Brown's going to be the fresher fighter. And if Brown could possibly weather the early storm, I really can see Brown winning by knockout in this fight. I mean, coming off, again, he has a solid win, Silva, but not too long ago he lost to Kim, and he let himself wide open, basically. His defense was terrible because he was so aggressive, and he got clipped. I could see very easily the same thing happening to the hands of Matt Brown. I mean, Matt Brown is a very devastating striker. He's very precise. He knows pretty much what to expect in this fight. He's motivated. I mean, as we all know, he was talking about the line and how he feels disrespected in this fight. So he's got something to prove here. So I think it is definitely a dog or pass situation. I think the line is getting a little bit out of hand because you can't deny what Matt Brown has accomplished during this run. And at the same time, you cannot deny how inconsistent Silva's been. I mean, he looked great against Jason High in his last fight against Sato. I mean, he was a 12-1 favorite, 11-1 favorite. I forget what the closing line was, but he was an outrageous favorite, so he should have looked good against that fight. But again, in his loss to Fitch, he was very respectable. It was a very close competitive fight. But he still got beat by a top tier guy. And then again, that devastating knockout loss to Kim kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit because he cannot afford to do that similar thing against a guy like Brown. So as far as a pure pick goes, I am picking slightly leaning towards Silva, but I do think the line is a little bit too high and there could possibly be some value on Matt Brown.
Now, I agree that Matt Brown's a live dog. I agree so much that I'm actually picking him to win here, and this is why. Looking at this fight, Eric Silva is a product of a tremendous amount of hype, but you look at the people he's beat, Charlie Brenneman, Sato, Jason High, none of those guys really are top-tier welterweights. And Matt Brown, while he wasn't always a top-tier guy, he's on a tremendous run, and you look at Silva again, and every time that he stepped it up against a guy in the top 10, in the top 15, he loses. Dong Hyun Kim, he won the first round, and then Dong Hyun Kim knocked him out in the second round. John Fitch won pretty much all 3 rounds. It was a great competitive battle, but Silva wound up on the losing end again when he got tested against a top guy. So while he is a very talented fighter and he beats the guys he's supposed to beat, he loses against the guys that are really good. And I think Matt Brown has that skill set that is going to give Eric Silva some problems. Honestly, you look at this fight, and the only way that I see Silva pulling this off is by submission, and I don't think it's going to be that easy. While Brown has been submitted several times in the past, it looks like he's shored up that part of his game to the point where he started using some offensive wrestling against Wonderboy Thompson, another really talented welterweight, another hyped up prospect that Brown just disemboweled in national television. You look at Jordan Meehan, a really good prospect, and Brown just went in there on this current run and just crushed him and got a really impressive finish. Mike Pyle, a guy that's ranked in the top 15 with good knockout power, very dangerous, and Brown obliterated him in less than a minute. So I just think that Matt Brown is kind of unstoppable right now. And you look at it, Brown has a tremendous chin. He can take a lot of punishment. He's done that multiple times throughout his career. He calls himself a technical brawler where he pushes forward, he forces his opponent to engage with him, he eats some shots, and he's very accurate with his big, heavy, nasty shots. And I think that that's going to be something that is going to fluster Silva a little bit, because we saw in the Kim fight, Silva can get suckered into a brawl. You know, Kim isn't the most technical guy on the feet, but Kim just went right at him, and Silva played the game, and he lost. And Silva was really sloppy. He gassed in that fight very quickly. And I think that that's something to be really scary about heading into a 5-round main event type fight. So I think that Brown fighting right in his backyard, Brown having a tremendous chin compared to Silva, who did get, KTFO'd against Silva, that's very scary, because I think Brown has a lot more power than Donghyun Kim. And the fact that I think Brown is able to keep this fight standing, and Brown having a slight, not a great, but a slight cardio advantage, I just think a lot of the factors here are for Matt Brown, and I'm really surprised how big of an underdog he is, because I'm going to pick him. So, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, once again, I think we have a live dog on our hands. I agree with you. Matt Brown he's going to have the reach advantage, and his technical skills have shown up really good on paper. He has very high accuracy. He has a very good knockdown rate. Obviously, he's scored 7 knockdowns in his UFC career. And he's definitely a live fire plug here. If he goes after Silva, stuffs some takedowns, he pursues people unlike anyone I've ever seen. And he finds a way to land on their chin. He hurts people. He knocks them out. Eric Silva has looked fast and explosive. But we haven't seen him look good against the higher level competition, and Matt Brown is definitely that guy. So, one way or the other, this is going to be some fireworks. I think if it stays on their feet, they're both going to really get after it. But Matt Brown's striking is just, in a word, it's dangerous. He just hits violently. And I even responded to him on Twitter and told him what some of his striking stats were. They were complimentary, obviously, and his response was simply 90% of the time I knock them out every time, which I think is a wrong Burgundy reference, but he knows that he's good at that. He knows that's his skill. He's been submitted a bunch of times on the mat. That's definitely been his weakness. He's been working on that. So maybe that's less of a hole in his game now against a guy like Silva, who could definitely exploit that hole. But just the overall efficiency. I mean, Matt Brown is just more effective in the cage. He's outperformed himself in fights, in his last few fights. So, yeah, definitely a live dog. I realize the over-under here is 1.5 rounds, which is, you almost never see that for a welterweight fight. You normally only see that for heavyweight sluggers or light heavyweights. But these guys are both capable of finishing, and it could happen quickly. So one interesting prop here, Matt Brown by TKO is plus 300. So I think there's some value there. I do think it should end early. And Matt Brown, I think the line went a little too far. So I think there's some value on the underdog play.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 40. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out early Saturday around 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. We'll also likely be posting a play for Bellator that includes Bellator 119 on early Friday around the same time. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free plays via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.